That's right. All right, what about communism in theory? Well, you often hear one of the things that's always one of my pet peeves. You'll hear somebody say, communism is a really pretty good idea. If you just read the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx, you see it's actually a pretty good book. Stalin and these guys, they got a hold of it and perverted the whole thing. It was actually a pretty good idea. When I hear that, I know they've actually never read the Communist Manifesto. And there's no excuse for that because it's very short. Okay, this is the Penguin Signet Classics edition. You can find it online, Marxist.org. Doesn't take a lot of time. Doesn't take a lot of time to read this. And Marx himself put this very concisely. He said that the theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. Abolition of private property. That's just a sentence on a page, but think about what it means. My 5-year-old son could tell you that when you want to try to abolish private property, you are going to have to shoot and kill a lot of people. Property is one of the most fundamental of rights, from Judeo-Christian, from Aristotle to Thomas Jefferson to Locke, from the cave to the courthouse. Anybody with common sense knows that that's a horrific idea. And Marx even says in here that, of course, despotic inroads are going to be necessary in order to put this in place. Well, of course they are. You can't do something like that. Marx wrote that in 1848. You'll also hear oftentimes people say that, Marx was kind of ambiguous. It's not real clear. And these other guys filled in the blanks, Lenin and Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot and Castro. And that's where all the trouble happened. Really, if you actually read the book, Marx has a 10-point plan. A 10-point plan. Point 1, abolition of property and land, and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Point 2, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. Heavy progressive or graduated income tax. We got our progressive income tax, but the Constitution had to be amended for it to happen in 1913. And by the 1940s, it was 94% on the highest income under FDR. Read Bert Folsom's book on FDR, FDR Goes to War. FDR actually considered putting a 99.5% tax rate on income over $100,000. Point 3, abolition of all rights of inheritance. So your mom or dad, under Marx's vision, would not be able to leave you their inheritance, their money, their property. So that's all it says. Abolition of all right of inheritance, period. 4, confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. 5, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly. These are very short. Marx is to the point. 6, centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. 7, extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. 8, equal obligation of all to work. Okay, can't argue with that one. Get this one, 9, combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by a more equitable distribution of the population over the country. A more equitable distribution of the population over the country, going to massively move around people. Cambodia, the killing fields. Watch the killing fields when everybody is evacuated out of the main city and out into the rural areas. They are more equitably distributing people across the countryside. 10, Karl Marx, free education for all children in public schools. Free education for all children in public schools. Marx was very, very specific. All right, so that's communism in theory. Communism first takes hold in Bolshevik Russia. First takes hold in Bolshevik Russia. In 1917, and specifically under the leadership of, I'll write down here. Sorry, my writing is not real good. under Vladimir Lenin. Among the things that the Bolsheviks committed themselves to, because Marx talks about it throughout the Communist Manifesto, is world revolution. World revolution, the instrument for world revolution was going to be the Comintern. And Comintern stood for the Communist International. Now, the Comintern was the goal here, and it was established in March 1919. There would be a communist party in every country in the world. And all of these, they would all have representatives in Moscow. The Comintern would be the global headquarters for the communist revolution. All the different communist parties would report to it. Trotsky, one of the top people among the Bolsheviks, referred to the Comintern as, quote, the general staff of the world revolution, the general staff of the world revolution. And right away, the Comintern was sponsoring rebellions in Poland, Hungary, Finland, Germany, all before 1921. Russian Civil War went from 1918 to 1921. In the United States, and here's where we're going to get to what really scares conservatives. In the United States, in September 1919, a communist party was formed. It would eventually be called CPUSA, Communist Party USA. Now, Communist Party USA, like all these other different parties, committed itself to a worldwide Soviet republic. That was the goal. The goal was a worldwide Soviet republic. Okay, so Vladimir Lenin was the first Soviet leader. He's in from 1917 to 1924. He's followed by Joseph Stalin. Stalin is in power until March 5th, 1953. That his reign ends with his death. You know, that's how leadership ends under communist regimes, not by a peaceful transition of power with people voting, but by death of the leader. Stalin kills massive numbers of people in the 1930s. Communist Party USA in the 1930s gets a huge number of people. Huge number of people. It got its highest number of people ever in the 1930s, when membership peaked at about 100,000. So there are a lot less Americans then than there are today, but 100,000 was decent. It was a decent number of members. Communist Party USA tried its best to dupe fellow travelers, progressives, liberals. A lot of these progressives and liberals would make pilgrimages to the Soviet Union, where they would go over and admire. They would come back in admiration of what they saw in Russia. Professor John Dewey, if I may plug my own book, Dupes. I wrote a book called Dupes, published by ISI Books. Professor John Dewey went over there, just one of the founders of the American public education system, swooned. Dewey was dizzied with glee with what he saw in the Soviet Union. You won't believe the things that Dewey said about Stalin's Soviet Union. He was infatuated, just adored what he saw. And they were rapidly translating Dewey's works into Russian, because the Bolsheviks thought that these founding works that are so crucial to the American public education system were ideal for the Soviet communist totalitarian educational system. They loved Dewey. Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood, which began as the American Birth Control League, she made her trip to Russia. In fact, if you Google, you can find it. Her American Birth Control Review, she talks about her trip to Russia. She was fascinated by how the Russians were implementing birth control. She's a little appalled by the number of abortions that were taking place, but she said, well, no problem. Once a fully functioning communist society is in place, as the Bolsheviks leaders have told me, neither birth control or abortion will be necessary, because you'll have the full happiness. She actually wrote this. You can look it up. You think I'm exaggerating? I haven't misquoted or misrepresented a word. Look it up. And Margaret Sanger, American Birth Control Review. So Goes in the 1930s, World War II. World War II goes from September 1939. It's started by the Hitler-Stalin Pact, signed August 23rd, 24th, 1939. A week later, September 1st, the Germans invade Poland, Nazis invade Poland. You know that, right? 2.5 weeks later, on September 17th, Stalin's Russia invaded Poland from the east, and World War II is on. Goes until 1945. War ends. The Cold War begins after that. Cold War arguably begins, I would argue, at Yalta, February 4th to 11th, 1945. One of the big three conferences between FDR, Churchill, and Stalin. Stalin breaks a number of his promises at Yalta, including his promise to hold free and unfettered elections in Eastern Europe, which he was then occupying, countries like Poland, all the others. He never did. He did not honor those elections. March 1946, Winston Churchill comes to the United States at the invitation of President Harry Truman, and he gives his Iron Curtain speech in Fulton, Missouri, warning that an Iron Curtain is descending across the continent, Central and Eastern Europe. All these traditional countries in that area, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Albania, Romania, East Germany, all of these are falling within the Soviet sphere of influence. The Iron Curtain is descending and the Cold War is on. Cold War.
Nobody knows what Soviet Russia and its Communist International Organization intends to do in the immediate future. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent.
One more thing. 1949, China, Chiang Kai-shek's China falls to the communists under Mao. And American conservatives are really, really worried. They're also worried because of the penetration by American communists into the Roosevelt administration and the Truman administration after that. Here I would recommend Stalin's Secret Agents, excellent book by Stan Evans and Herb Romerstein. And among the different agents that we now know, Alger Hiss, Harry Dexter White, Lachlan Curry, Lawrence Duggan, there were many of them.